Marcus Hale was unaware his wife was a billionaire when he divorced her for her wealthy best friend, until the $2.3 billion company documents were revealed in a boardroom full of witnesses who watched him realize, in real time, that he'd been working for her the entire time. It happened 3 days after Elena gave birth to their second daughter. Her body was still trembling from the epidural when Marcus slid the divorce papers across the hospital bed tray. His eyes fixed on his phone were messages from Vivian Chen, Elena's childhood best friend, now a venture capital celebrity worth an estimated $140 million, waited unread. He didn't look at the baby. He looked at the settlement terms he'd had Vivian's lawyer draft. $4,000 a month, the small condo in Fremont, supervised visits with their older daughter. "It's generous," he said, his voice flat and rehearsed. His mother Diane stood in the doorway, arms crossed, nodding her approval. "Vivian builds empires," Diane told Elena. "You make grocery lists." The room smelled like antiseptic and the flowers Marcus hadn't sent. A nurse hesitated in the hallway, watching, saying nothing. What neither of them knew, what the audience is about to learn, is that the $2.3 billion AI logistics company Marcus worked for, the one Vivian publicly took credit for founding, the one that had made her the face of Forbes and TechCrunch 18 months earlier. Elena owned 86% of it through a trust her late father had built like a fortress. Vivian owned 9%. Marcus, the chief strategy officer who loved mentioning his title at dinner parties, owned stock options worth $640,000 that would vest only if Elena, as majority shareholder, signed off. She had coded the first prototype at 19. Vivian had been the pitch. Elena had been the product. And Marcus had just tried to divorce the woman who could erase his career with one phone call. This isn't just a story about a man who chose the wrong woman. It's about what happens when kindness is mistaken for weakness, silence is mistaken for stupidity, and a steel-wrapped heart finally stops bending. 6 years earlier, in a workshop behind a sprawling Atherton estate, Elena Constantine sat cross-legged on a concrete floor surrounded by server towers and tangled Ethernet cables, building something that would change logistics forever. But that story comes later. Right now, in this private recovery room at Palo Alto Medical Center, all that matters is the pain radiating through her body and the man standing beside her hospital bed holding papers she can barely focus on. Marcus explained the settlement terms with the calm precision of someone who'd rehearsed this speech. $4,000 a month, the 2-bedroom condo in Fremont, the one with the broken dishwasher and the parking spot that flooded when it rained. Supervised custody of Lily, their 4-year-old daughter, pending a psychological evaluation he'd already scheduled without telling her. "My lawyer says this is more than fair given the circumstances," he said, not looking at her face. His thumb moved across his phone screen. Another message from Vivian. "Probably," he smiled slightly. "Vivian's attorney reviewed everything. She wanted to make sure you were protected." Elena's arms tightened around Maya, 3 days old, still learning how to breathe outside the womb. The baby made a small sound, not quite a cry. Something deep in Elena's chest cracked open. Diane stepped forward from her position in the doorway. She'd been standing there for 20 minutes, arms crossed, radiating the kind of cold satisfaction that came from being proven right about something she'd predicted for years. "You know, dear, pregnancy isn't an excuse to let yourself go completely," she said, her voice carrying the false warmth of maternal concern. Vivian had a trainer throughout hers. She was back in her pre-baby clothes within 6 weeks. She smoothed her St. John blazer, a gesture Elena had learned meant judgment was coming. "But I suppose some women prioritize differently." Elena didn't respond. Her postpartum body ached in ways she hadn't known were possible. The epidural had left her legs heavy and uncertain. Her stomach, still swollen and tender, pressed against the thin hospital gown. She'd gained 47 pounds this pregnancy. Diane had mentioned it at every family dinner for the past 4 months. Marcus set the papers on the tray table, pushing aside the untouched lunch the nurses had brought 3 hours ago. "Just sign page 7 and page 12. The rest is standard language." He checked his phone again. "I have a call in 10 minutes. A nurse appeared in the doorway, a young woman with kind eyes and cornrows pulled back in a neat bun. She glanced at the papers, at Marcus's expensive suit, at Diane's pearls, at Elena holding the baby with trembling arms. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. She adjusted the IV line without speaking and left the room. Elena watched her go. No one was coming to stop this. Marcus's phone buzzed. He pulled it out, read the message, smiled. Vivian needs me to review the investor deck before the 4 o'clock. Can you just... He gestured at the papers. Elena looked down at the settlement agreement. The words blurred together. $4,000. Supervised visits. Psychological evaluation. The black pen sat beside the pages, already uncapped. Ready. Her hand moved without her permission. She signed her married name on page 7. Elena Hale. The letters looked wrong, like someone else's handwriting. Marcus took the papers before the ink dried. I'll have my lawyer file these tomorrow. He was already moving toward the door. Diane will help you pack up when they discharge you. Marcus. Her voice came out smaller than she'd intended. Apologetic. She hated the sound of it. He stopped but didn't turn around. What? She wanted to ask if he was sure. If they could try counseling. If he remembered their wedding day when he'd called her the smartest woman he'd ever met. If he'd looked at Maya even once since she was born. The questions died in her throat. Nothing. It's nothing. He nodded once and left the room. Through the doorway, Elena heard him answer his phone in the hallway. Hey, I'm done here. Yeah, she signed. I'll be there in 20. Diane lingered a moment longer. This is for the best, Elena. Marcus needs someone who can keep up with him. Vivian understands ambition. You've always been more comfortable in the background. She touched her pearls, a habitual gesture. Maybe now you can focus on being a good mother. That's what really matters, isn't it? Then she was gone too, her heels clicking down the hallway in Marcus's wake. The room went silent. Elena sat alone with the baby in her arms, her body still bleeding, still healing, still recovering from bringing life into the world 3 days ago. Maya's tiny fingers curled around Elena's thumb. The baby's eyes were closed, trusting, unaware. Elena's gaze drifted to the wall beside the recovery bed. A brass plaque, newly installed, gleamed in the afternoon light. She'd noticed it when they'd first wheeled her into this room after delivery, but the pain had been too overwhelming to read it carefully. Now, in the stillness Marcus and Diane had left behind, the words came into focus. Next Flow AI Logistics Maternal Health Wing. Constantine Family Endowment, 2019. Constantine, her father's name. Her name, the one she'd been born with, before she became Elena Hale and disappeared into someone else's story. She whispered into the silence, "Papa." The baby stirred against her chest. Elena closed her eyes and let herself cry for the first time since labor began. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just quiet tears that fell onto Maya's soft blanket while the plaque on the wall caught the light and held it. What Marcus didn't know, what he'd never bothered to learn, was that the building he'd just walked out of, the hospital where his daughter had been born, the maternal health wing named for a family he'd dismissed as old money Elena couldn't even touch, had been funded by the same trust that owned 86% of the company where he collected his paycheck every 2 weeks. To understand how a woman signs away what was never his to take, we must go back 6 years. The workshop behind the Constantine family estate in Atherton smelled like solder and coffee, metal and ambition. Elena sat cross-legged on the concrete floor, 19 years old, her laptop balanced on a cardboard box marked Server Components Fragile. Lines of code scrolled across the screen, elegant and efficient, solving a problem that had stumped logistics engineers for 15 years. Her father, Dmitry Constantine, watched from his workbench nearby, a slight smile on his weathered face. "You are building something real," he said in the accent he'd never quite lost, even after 30 years in America. Not loud, not flashy, real. He'd built his own fortune the same way, through patents on logistics automation systems that made shipping containers move faster through ports. Quiet competence, he called it, the kind of wealth that didn't need to announce itself. Elena's fingers paused over the keyboard. "I think the routing algorithm finally works. If I'm right, this could cut delivery times by 40% in dense urban areas." "Show me." She ran the simulation. Green lines traced across a map of San Francisco, optimizing routes in real time, learning from traffic patterns, predicting delays before they happen. Dmitry leaned forward. His smile widened. This is the one, Malenka. This changes everything. What Elena didn't know yet was that her boarding school roommate, Vivian Chen, had been watching from the doorway for the past 10 minutes. Vivian stepped into the workshop in her usual uniform of confidence. Designer jeans, a black blazer, perfect posture. That's incredible, Elle. Seriously, you're going to change the world with this. She'd graduated from Harvard Business School 6 months earlier and had been staying at the Constantine estate while she figured out her next move. Elena had offered. That's what friends did. I don't know. Playing around. Elena closed the laptop, suddenly self-conscious. Don't downplay it. This is a company. A real company. Vivian sat down on the floor beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. I have an idea. You build, I pitch. You're brilliant with code, but you hate talking to investors. I love talking to investors, but I can't code to save my life. We're perfect complements. Elena looked at her father. Dmitry's expression had shifted into something more careful, more watchful, but he said nothing. I don't know if I'm ready for that, Elena said softly. You're never going to feel ready. That's how you know it's the right time. Vivian squeezed her hand. Trust me, we'll do this together. Elena trusted her. That was the first mistake. 6 months later, Nextflow AI Logistics was incorporated. Elena owned 86% through a structure Dmitry insisted on. Transferred from his own holdings with legal protections Elena didn't fully understand yet. Vivian received 9% as sweat equity. The remaining 5% was reserved for future employees. 3 weeks after the incorporation papers were signed, Dmitry was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The doctors gave him 6 months. He lasted 9 working from his hospital bed to establish the Constantine Family Trust with an attorney named Miriam Okonkwo, a woman with sharp eyes and sharper contracts. Elena sat beside him in the hospice room in Palo Alto on the last afternoon of his life. The morphine made his words soft, but his mind remained clear. He held a folder of documents in hands that had once built shipping empires and now could barely grip a pen. Everything is protected, he told her. The trust, your shares. It cannot be divided in divorce. It cannot be touched by creditors. It requires your signature and mine. He stopped, corrected himself. It required my signature, now only yours. His breathing was labored. Each word cost him. Miriam knows everything. She will call when you need her. Papa, don't. Listen. His hand found hers. You are not soft, Elena. You are steel wrapped in kindness. People will mistake one for the other. Let them. His eyes held hers with an intensity that cut through the morphine fog. Let them think they're winning until you're ready to stop losing. I don't understand. You will. He squeezed her hand once, weakly. Promise me. Protect yourself first. Always. I promise. He died that night with Elena holding his hand and a folder of trust documents on the bedside table that would one day save her life. The company grew slowly at first, then exponentially. Elena continued building the architecture, working 16-hour days, solving problems that emerged as the system scaled. Vivian handled everything external, investor pitches, press interviews, conference appearances. The division of labor felt natural. Elena stayed in the background because she preferred it there. Vivian stepped into the spotlight because she thrived in it. Elena met Marcus Hale at a TechCrunch Disrupt networking event 18 months after her father's death. She'd gone reluctantly, dragged there by Vivian, who insisted she needed to show her face. Marcus approached her at the coffee station, charming and attentive in a way that felt genuine. He asked about her work, actually listened to her answers, laughed at her nervous jokes about server architecture. He was from a working-class family in Sacramento, ambitious but not arrogant, focused on building a career in business development. When he learned she was connected to Nextflow, he seemed impressed but not calculating. Not yet. They married 18 months later in the garden, where she'd built the first prototype. Marcus signed a prenuptial agreement without reading it carefully, focused instead on his new job offer from Nextflow as a business development hire. Vivian had recommended him for the position. Elena thought it was kind of her. At the reception, Marcus stood and raised his glass, his smile warm and genuine, his eyes finding hers across the table, full of investors and family and friends. "To marrying the smartest woman I know," he said. "I promise to spend every day trying to deserve you." The guests applauded. Elena's cheeks flushed with happiness. Vivian touched Marcus's shoulder briefly, whispering something that made him laugh. Everything felt perfect. Everything felt safe. The admiration lasted 2 years. Then Vivian became famous. Nextflow AI Logistics went public on a Tuesday morning in September, 3 years after the wedding. Elena watched the opening bell ceremony from her living room, holding 2-month-old Lily against her chest while the baby slept. On the screen, Vivian stood at the center of the New York Stock Exchange floor in a black Armani suit, surrounded by investors and press, her hand hovering over the ceremonial button. The chyron read, "Vivian Chen, founder and CEO, Nextflow AI Logistics." No mention of Elena. No mention of the garage in Atherton or the nights Elena had stayed awake until dawn, debugging the routing algorithm that made everything possible. Marcus had flown to New York for the event. He'd kissed Elena goodbye that morning without meeting her eyes, his attention already on his phone, on the celebration waiting for him 3,000 miles away. "This is Vivian's moment," he'd said. "She earned this." Elena had nodded, said nothing, watched him leave. The decision to position Vivian as sole founder had been made by a PR firm Marcus recommended, executed without consulting Elena, finalized in meetings she wasn't invited to attend. When she'd asked about it, tentatively, apologetically, Marcus had sighed with the particular exhaustion he reserved for her questions. Does it really matter who gets credit? The company's succeeding. That's what counts. But he'd started working directly under Vivian as Chief Strategy Officer by then, sitting beside her in every investor pitch, every board meeting, every press interview. His business card said CSO in clean, sans serif type. Hers, the one she'd ordered herself and never used, said technical consultant. The erasure happened slowly, then completely. At company events, Marcus stopped introducing her as his wife. "This is Elena," he'd say, the sentence ending there. No context offered. After Lily was born, the introduction changed. "Elena, who helps with the kids." The phrase landed like a diminishment she was supposed to accept gracefully. She smiled, nodded, held her daughter and tried not to notice the way other people's eyes slid past her, already looking for someone more important to talk to. She'd gained 40 pounds during the pregnancy, her soft body becoming fuller, rounder, harder to hide beneath the careful clothes she'd chosen. Diane noticed immediately. At Sunday dinners at the Hale family home in Menlo Park, Diane began offering advice wrapped in maternal concern. "Maybe try intermittent fasting, dear. It worked wonders for my friend Patricia." She'd placed the breadbasket pointedly out of Elena's reach. "Vivian looks stunning lately, doesn't she? I asked her about her trainer. She gave me his card. I could give it to you if you'd like." Marcus said nothing during these moments. He'd check his phone, change the subject, let his mother's words settle into Elena's skin like stones. When Elena tried to discuss returning to product architecture work, she missed the code, missed solving problems, missed feeling useful. Marcus would smile indulgently, the way you'd smile at a child suggesting something adorable and impossible. "Let's talk about real career," he'd say. "You've got Lily to think about now. That's your real job." What he didn't know was that Elena never stopped working. She consulted on Nextflow's most complex technical problems under the alias E. Constantine, communicating through encrypted channels with the engineering team, debugging critical failures at 2 in the morning while Marcus slept and Lily breathed softly in her crib. The engineers knew her only as the mysterious architect who could solve anything. Marcus knew nothing. She kept it hidden because she'd learned that telling him about her work only invited his dismissal, and the dismissal hurt worse than the silence. Then something shifted. 14 months before the hospital bed divorce papers, Elena found a hotel receipt in Marcus's jacket pocket while sorting laundry. The Ritz-Carlton, downtown San Francisco, charged to his corporate card. She checked the date. He told her he was in San Jose that night. Her hands went still on the fabric. Her chest tightened. She told herself there were explanations, meetings that ran late, last-minute changes. She was being paranoid, insecure, the kind of wife who doubted her husband without cause. Then she found the shared calendar, accidentally visible on his laptop screen when she walked past his home office. Events labeled V, strategy session. V, dinner. V, weekend planning, MTG. All on dates he'd said he was traveling alone. Then the text messages on his phone screen while he showered, signed simply V. Miss you already. Tonight was perfect. He doesn't suspect. Elena spent 6 weeks gaslighting herself, constructing elaborate explanations, deciding she was imagining things, that her postpartum anxiety was making her see threats that didn't exist. She didn't confront him. She watched. She waited. She doubted herself more than she doubted him because that's what she'd been trained to do. The TechCrunch magazine appeared on the kitchen counter on a Thursday morning, left open to the cover story. Vivian's face filled the page, photographed in front of the Nextflow logo, arms crossed, expression confident. The headline read, Vivian Chen, the self-made AI queen, worth $140 million. A sticky note was attached to the top of the page in Marcus's handwriting, sharp and clear. This is what building something looks like. Elena stared at the note for a long time. At the implied comparison, at the contempt folded into 9 words. She was holding Lily on her hip. The baby grabbed for the magazine. Elena moved it out of reach and very carefully did not cry. She hired a private investigator the next day, a professional named Sarah Chen, no relation to Vivian, who worked out of an office in Oakland and spoke in clipped, efficient sentences. 3 weeks, Sarah said. I'll have everything you need. She did. Photographs of Marcus and Vivian entering hotels together. Timestamps matching the lies he'd told. Receipts for jewelry Elena had never received. A paper trail of an affair hidden in plain sight through investor dinners and strategy weekends that were neither. Elena filed everything in a folder labeled Evidence and put it in the back of her closet behind winter coats she never wore. Then she sat on the edge of her bed in the house she'd bought with trust money Marcus didn't know existed, and called the one person her father had told her to call when everything fell apart. Miriam Okonkwo answered on the second ring. Elena. Her voice was calm, unsurprised. Your father prepared for this. I've been waiting for you to call. But Elena wasn't ready to act. Not yet. She still believed he might choose her. Marcus insisted she attend the Nextflow series Sea Celebration dinner, even though she was 7 months pregnant, exhausted, and her feet had swollen so badly that morning she'd cried trying to put on shoes. It's important, he'd said, not looking up from his phone. Vivian specifically asked for you to be there. It would look bad if you didn't show. Elena wore the only formal dress that still fit, a navy blue maternity dress she'd ordered online because she couldn't bear to shop in person anymore, couldn't bear the dressing room mirrors or the sales assistant's sympathetic smiles. The private dining room at Bennu Restaurant in San Francisco was filled with 25 venture capitalists and tech journalists, all of them there to celebrate Vivian's success in closing a $200 million funding round that valued Nextflow at $1.8 billion. The room hummed with expensive cologne and champagne, and the particular energy of people who believed they were witnessing the birth of the next unicorn. Diane arrived as Marcus's guest, not Elena's. She swept in wearing a cream St. John's suit and pearls, kissed Marcus on both cheeks, and turned to Elena with the kind of smile that wasn't a smile at all. Oh, Elena, you came. Her eyes traveled down Elena's body, lingering on her rounded stomach, her full hips, the way the dress stretched across her breasts. Pregnancy isn't an excuse to stop trying. Dear, Vivian looked radiant when she was expecting. She had a trainer come to her house every morning at 5. Elena's hands found the fabric of her dress and smoothed it unnecessarily. I didn't know Vivian had children. Oh, she doesn't. I meant hypothetically. Diane touched her pearls. A gesture Elena had learned meant a cutting remark was coming, though I suppose some women prioritize differently. The seating chart placed Vivian at the head of the long table, Marcus directly to her right in the seat reserved for the chief strategy officer, and Diane beside him. Elena was seated at the far end with junior staff members and a marketing intern who looked barely out of college. The geography of the room told the story more clearly than words. Who mattered? Who didn't? Vivian stood to give her keynote speech 20 minutes into dinner. She looked perfect in a black Prada-sheath dress and statement earrings, her posture commanding, her smile practiced and warm. 6 years ago, she began, her voice carrying easily across the room, I had an idea, a vision for how AI could revolutionize logistics. I was told it was impossible. I was told the technology didn't exist. But I believed. She paused for effect. The room leaned in. I built Nextflow from nothing, from an idea in my apartment to a company that's changing how the world moves. And tonight, with your partnership, we're just getting started. The room erupted in applause. Glasses were raised. Vivian's smile widened. She didn't mention Elena once. Marcus beamed beside her, clapping louder than anyone, already turning to shake hands with the investor on his left. Elena sat at the far end of the table, her hands folded in her lap over her stomach where the baby, Maya, though she didn't know her name yet, kicked hard against her ribs. A tech journalist seated across from Elena, a young woman with wire-rimmed glasses and a press badge from TechCrunch, leaned forward. And what do you do? She asked politely. Elena opened her mouth to answer. Before she could speak, Marcus's voice cut down the length of the table, loud enough for everyone to hear. Elena's taking time off to focus on family. He smiled indulgently in her direction, the way you'd smile at a child who'd interrupted an adult conversation. Vivian and I are the builders here. The table laughed. Polite, knowing laughter. The kind that said they understood the subtext. The wife who couldn't keep up. The husband who'd outgrown her. The natural order of things. The baby kicked again. Elena pressed her hand against the movement and excused herself to the bathroom. The hallway was blessedly quiet, the sound of the dinner muffled behind heavy doors. Elena stood at the sink in the empty bathroom, running cold water over her wrists, breathing carefully through the tightness in her chest. She looked at herself in the mirror, her flushed face, her tired eyes, the dress that broadcast her pregnancy like an announcement of irrelevance. The door opened. Two women entered, still talking, not noticing Elena in the corner stall she'd retreated to when she heard voices. Tech reporters from their conversation. One of them touched up her lipstick while the other checked her phone. Vivian's story is incredible, the first one said. True self-made founder. You don't see that often. Marcus Hale is smart to position himself as her number two, the other replied. Did you see his wife? Sweet, but completely out of her depth. He's obviously setting himself up for the next level. Think they're together? Him and Vivian. I'd bet money on it. The way he looks at her, that's not professional admiration. They left, still talking, their heels clicking down the hallway. Elena stood in the stall, one hand pressed against the tile wall, the other against her stomach. She didn't cry. She didn't make a sound. She just stood there until her breathing steadied and the baby stopped kicking. She returned to the table and sat through 2 more hours in silence. She smiled when expected, nodded when spoken to, ate nothing. The irony burned in her chest like acid. While they celebrated Vivian's billion-dollar success story, Elena's signature was on every patent, every incorporation document, every piece of code that made Nextflow possible. On every contract, she wasn't Elena Hale. She was E. Constantine, the hidden architect of everything they were toasting. The car ride home was silent until Marcus spoke. You embarrassed me tonight. His voice was calm, reasonable, the tone he used when explaining why something was her fault. Vivian had to cover for your awkwardness 3 times. Do you know how that looks? Elena stared out the window at the lights of the 101 freeway sliding past. I'm sorry, she heard herself say, the words automatic. You should be. She didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She waited until they got home, until Marcus had fallen asleep in their bed, until the house was completely silent. Then she opened her laptop at the kitchen table at 2:47 in the morning and wrote 5 words to Miriam Okonkwo. I'm ready. Start preparing everything. She hit send and closed the computer. Something had broken inside her at that dinner, not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. She was done hoping he would choose her. She was done believing patience would save what had already been lost. 3 weeks later, Elena went into early labor. Marcus was with Vivian in Los Angeles. The condo Marcus gave her in the settlement sat on the sixth floor of a glass-fronted building in Fremont, directly across the street from Nextflow's headquarters. The view from her living room window was unobstructed. She could see the main entrance, the parking garage where Marcus's Tesla was probably still parked in its reserved spot, and, if she looked up 3 floors, the corner office where Vivian's lights burned late into the night. Elena stood at that window now, 6 days after signing the divorce papers in her hospital bed, surrounded by moving boxes she hadn't unpacked and furniture that had arrived that afternoon, still wrapped in plastic. Both daughters were with Diane per the temporary custody arrangement Marcus's lawyer had insisted on. The apartment was silent, empty, a deliberate humiliation disguised as generosity. Marcus had chosen this building specifically so she could see what she walked away from, as he'd put it when he handed her the keys while she was still in the hospital. She could see it now. Vivian's silhouette moved past the window. Even from this distance, Elena recognized her posture, the way she gestured while on the phone, confident and certain. A memory surfaced unbidden. Vivian, at 19, sitting on Elena's dorm room floor, saying, "We're going to change the world together." Elena had believed her. That was the first mistake. The boxes from her father's estate sat in the corner where the movers had left them, sealed with packing tape and labeled in Miriam's precise handwriting. Dmitri Konstantin, personal effects. Elena had been avoiding them since the funeral 6 years ago, unable to face what remained of him. Tonight, alone in this apartment that felt like a cage, she finally opened the smallest box. Inside was a letter, still sealed in its envelope, addressed to her in her father's careful script. Her hands trembled as she broke the seal. The letter was dated 3 days before he died. The handwriting grew shakier toward the end, but the words were clear. "Malenka," he wrote, using the Ukrainian endearment he'd called her since childhood. "If you are reading this, something has happened that required Miriam to give you the full truth. I built protections into the trust that even you do not fully understand yet. The Constantine Family Trust holds 86% of Nextflow through a structure that cannot be divided in divorce, cannot be touched by creditors, cannot be transferred without your explicit written consent. On every incorporation document, every patent filing, every contract, you are not Elena Hale. You are Elena Constantin. They can take the name you married into. They cannot take what you built or what I gave you to protect it." The letter continued, explaining the Gibraltar-based holding company, the dual signature requirements, the separate property classifications Miriam had woven through the prenup, like invisible wire. Then at the bottom, the words she remembered from his deathbed. "Let them think they're winning until you're ready to stop losing. You are not soft, Elena. You are steel wrapped in kindness. When they finally see it, stay calm. Calm is where power lives." She read the letter 3 times. Then she picked up the divorce settlement Marcus had pressured her to sign and read it with new eyes. It was a masterpiece of incompetence. $4,000 a month, the Fremont condo, supervised custody. But nowhere, not on a single page, did it mention her Nextflow shares. No waiver of trust assets, no release of corporate claims. Marcus's lawyer had written it as if she were a housewife with no income and no property, because that's what Marcus had told them she was. He'd been so certain of his narrative that he'd never bothered to check what she actually owned. Her silence hadn't been weakness. It had been strategy, guided by Miriam's brief phone call the day before the hospital. "Sign it. Trust me. Sign exactly what he gives you." Elena picked up her phone and called Miriam. It rang once. "Elena." Miriam's voice was calm, unsurprised, as if she'd been waiting by the phone. "Are you ready?" "I'm ready to stop losing." A pause, then, "Good. There's something you need to know." Marcus called an emergency board meeting for 2 weeks from now. He's pushing a merger with a Chinese logistics conglomerate that would dilute the existing share structure and consolidate operational control. He's positioning it as Vivian's strategic vision for global expansion. "He needs my vote." "He needs your vote," Miriam confirmed. "He doesn't know that yet. His lawyer never asked about your ownership stake because Marcus never told them to ask. They're proceeding as if Vivian controls the company and you're irrelevant." Something shifted inside Elena. Not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. The trembling in her hands stopped. Her breathing steadied. The apartment across from Nextflow's headquarters suddenly felt less like a cage and more like a watchtower. What happens at the meeting? I walk in with the trust documents, the incorporation filings, and a forensic accounting of every dollar Marcus has misappropriated from marital funds for his affair. The board learns who actually owns the company. Then we proceed from there. He'll be in the room. He'll be in the room, so will Vivian. So will 12 board members and Nextflow's general counsel. So will you. Elena looked at her reflection in the darkened window. Behind her, boxes. Ahead of her, across the street, Vivian's office lights. Her father's letter sat on the table beside her, its words burning into her memory. Steel wrapped in kindness. Tell me what I need to do. Show up, sit down, stay calm. Let me handle the rest. Miriam's voice carried the weight of 2 decades building legal structures designed for exactly this moment. Your only job is to be present when the truth becomes visible. Can you do that? Yes. Then I'll see you in 14 days. Elena? Yes? Your father would be very proud. The call ended. Elena stood at the window, watching Vivian's office lights across the street, and said aloud to the empty apartment, "He has no idea what he's working for." For the first time in 4 years, she smiled. 14 days later, Marcus walked into the boardroom, believing he owned the future. Marcus Hale walked into the Nextflow boardroom at exactly 10:30 on a Thursday morning, carrying a leather portfolio that contained what he believed was his future. He wore his best suit, Tom Ford, charcoal gray, the one Vivian had helped him pick out for the IPO roadshow. His Rolex caught the light as he set the portfolio on the polished mahogany table. 12 board members were already seated, plus Nextflow's general counsel. Coffee cups steamed, laptops glowed. The room smelled like expensive cologne and ambition. Vivian sat at the head of the table in a black Armani blazer, her hair pulled back, every inch the founder and CEO the world believed she was. She smiled at Marcus as he took the seat to her right, the seat reserved for the chief strategy officer. He smiled back, touched her hand briefly under the table where no one could see. The meeting began with standard agenda items, Q3 financial performance, hiring updates, a brief discussion of the new Seattle office lease. Marcus checked his phone twice, impatient to get to agenda item 4, the merger proposal, the deal that would change everything. Vivian had spent 3 months negotiating with Shenzhen Logistics International, a Chinese conglomerate willing to pay $2 billion for a controlling stake in Nextflow. The merger would dilute the existing share structure, consolidate operational control under a new holding company, and position Vivian as CEO of a truly global enterprise. Marcus would become president of strategic partnerships. The contracts were drafted, the term sheets were signed. They just needed board approval. He didn't notice that Elena's name wasn't on the attendance list. He'd stopped thinking about her 2 weeks ago. Dr. Vivian Marsh, the board chairwoman, reached agenda item 4 at 10:53. Special governance matter, she read from her notes. We have... The door opened. Miriam Okonkwo entered first, tall and immaculate in a structured navy dress, followed by 2 associates carrying document boxes, a woman with a forensic accountant's calm demeanor, and finally Elena. The room went silent. Marcus's first thought was confusion. Elena looked different. She wore a simple gray dress, her dark hair pulled back, no apology in her posture. She didn't look at him. She walked to an empty seat at the far end of the table and sat down with the careful composure of someone who knew exactly where she belonged. Vivian's face drained of all color. She recognized Miriam from the incorporation documents, from the trust paperwork she'd signed 6 years ago and never thought about again. Miriam didn't waste time on preambles. Good morning. I'm Miriam Okonkwo, representing the Constantine Family Trust. We're here regarding a governance matter that supersedes today's proposed agenda. She nodded to her associates, who began distributing packets to every board member. Thick packets, bound, tabbed. The sound of paper sliding across mahogany filled the silence. Marcus opened his copy. His hands moved automatically, flipping to the first tab. The words swam. Constantine Family Trust, beneficial ownership structure, established April 2018. Miriam's voice was clinical, precise. Tab 1 outlines the trust structure. Elena Constantine holds 86% of Nextflow AI Logistics through the Constantine Family Trust, established by her late father, Dmitry Constantine. This ownership has been consistent since incorporation. A board member, Gerald Chen from Sequoia, looked up sharply. I'm sorry, who? Elena Constantine. Miriam gestured toward Elena, who sat perfectly still, her hands folded on the table. Seated at the end of the table, the majority shareholder of this company. Marcus's throat closed. He looked at Elena. She looked back, her face calm, and he saw nothing of the woman who'd signed his divorce papers 3 weeks ago. Nothing of the wife who'd apologized for embarrassing him. She was a stranger. Vivian tried to speak. There must be some mistake. I'm the founder. I built Tab 2, Miriam continued, as if Vivian hadn't spoken. Original incorporation documents. Dmitry Constantine, majority owner, transferring 86% to Elena Constantine upon his death. Vivian Chen received 9% as sweat equity. The remaining 5% was allocated for employee stock options. The forensic accountant stepped forward, a woman named Dr. Sarah Lin, whose resume included 15 years at the SEC. Tab 3 contains documented evidence of fund misappropriation by Marcus Hale. $340,000 in marital funds diverted to personal accounts. Fraudulent expense reports totaling $67,000. Unauthorized use of corporate resources including company vehicles, hotel suites, and travel budgets for an extramarital affair conducted over 14 months. Marcus stopped breathing. The room tilted slightly. Tab 4, Dr. Lin continued, her voice neutral, factual, devastating. Code repository analysis. Every significant technical contribution to Nextflow's core platform is attributed to E. Constantine. Patent filings for the routing algorithm, the predictive logistics model, and the real-time optimization engine all bear Elena Constantine's signature as primary inventor. Press materials attributing sole founder status to Vivian Chen constitute fraudulent misrepresentation. Vivian pushed back from the table. Her chair scraped loudly. I can explain. Dr. Marsh, the board chairwoman, held up one hand. Her voice cut through the chaos with surgical precision. Mr. Hale, according to these documents, your employment status is at will, and your stock options vest only with majority shareholder approval. Is this correct? Marcus couldn't speak. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. Ms. Chen, Dr. Marsh continued, turning to Vivian, these documents indicate your ownership stake is 9%, not the controlling interest you've represented in merger negotiations. Is this correct? Vivian's confidence, usually so unshakable, crumbled visibly. She looked at Elena, her eyes pleading. We built this together. You know we did. Tell them. Elena didn't respond. Miriam placed a final document in front of Dr. Marsh. The trust is also pursuing a clawback lawsuit against Ms. Chen for $90 million in compensation received under fraudulent founder claims, stock options granted under false pretenses, and defamation damages for systematic erasure of Elena Constantine's contributions to this company. The room erupted in whispers. Board members flipped through documents. Dr. Marsh raised her voice. Mr. Hale, you are terminated for cause, effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building. Wait. Marcus found his voice, but it came out broken, desperate. Elena, this is insane. You can't. We were married. You signed the divorce papers. You agreed. I agreed to a divorce, Elena said, and her voice was so calm it stopped him mid-sentence. I didn't agree to give you what was never yours. Every eye in the room turned to her. She looked directly at Marcus, and he saw it finally. The steel wrapped in kindness his wife had always been. The power he'd never bothered to see because he'd been too busy looking at Vivian's louder version of success. You called me soft, Elena said. My father called me steel wrapped in kindness. He was right. She turned to Vivian, and her voice didn't rise, didn't harden, just delivered truth like a document stamped and notarized. I trusted you. That was my mistake. The lawyers will handle the rest. She stood, smoothed her dress, picked up her bag. Marcus's voice broke completely. Elena, wait, please. She didn't turn around, didn't pause, didn't give him the satisfaction of a reaction. Vivian started crying. quiet and helpless, her carefully constructed founder persona dissolving in real time. Dr. Marsh addressed Elena directly. Ms. Constantine, will you be staying for the remainder of the meeting? As majority shareholder, Miriam has my proxy, Elena said. I have my daughters to pick up. She walked to the door, opened it. The hallway beyond was bright and empty. She stepped through and let the door close behind her with a soft, final click. In the parking garage, Elena sat in her car, a modest Honda she'd driven since college, and allowed her hands to shake for the first time all morning. The adrenaline hit her all at once. She gripped the steering wheel and let herself cry, alone where no one could see, the way she'd learned to survive the past 4 years. Relief and grief tangled together until she couldn't separate them. After 10 minutes, she wiped her eyes, started the engine, and drove to Diane's house to pick up her daughters. The unraveling took 6 weeks. Marcus lost his job within 48 hours. Security escorted him from the next floor building with a banker's box containing a coffee mug and a framed photo of himself shaking hands with the mayor at the IPO celebration. No tech firm in Silicon Valley would touch him after the forensic accounting went public. His LinkedIn messages went unanswered. Recruiters stopped returning calls. By week 3, he was applying for business development roles at companies in Phoenix and Austin, cities far enough away that his name might not carry the same weight of humiliation. Vivian faced the clawback lawsuit and watched her carefully constructed world dismantle itself piece by piece. Her TED Talk was quietly removed from the platform. Her Wikipedia page was edited by anonymous contributors to read former minority co-founder instead of founder and CEO. Investors who'd celebrated her at launch parties stopped replying to emails. The venture capital firm where she'd planned to become a partner rescinded their offer. She moved to London 6 weeks after the board meeting, citing new opportunities in a press release no major outlet bothered to cover. Diane stopped calling. The family trust she'd assumed she had access to through Marcus, the one she'd mentioned casually at country club brunches, the safety net she'd imagined funding her retirement, turned out to be controlled entirely by Elena, who quietly removed Diane's name from every advisory list and charitable board her father had once placed her on out of courtesy. Marcus attempted to contact Elena 3 times through intermediary channels, carefully worded messages offering to work things out and find an equitable solution for the girls. Miriam Okonkwo responded with a restraining order and a cease and desist letter that used the word harassment in the first paragraph. Vivian sent one email, subject line, "I'm sorry," body, 3 paragraphs of explanation, justification, and regret that read like a press release drafted by a crisis communications team. Elena opened it, read the first sentence, and deleted it. She didn't reply. Some doors once closed don't need to be explained. The scene softened into something quieter. Elena sat in her father's study at the Constantine family estate in Atherton, the house where she'd learned to code, where she'd built the first Nextflow prototype, where her father had died holding her hand and telling her to protect herself first, always. Lily and Maya were with her now. Full custody, finalized by a family court judge who'd read the forensic accounting report and hadn't needed much convincing. The $4,000 a month Marcus had offered her in the hospital. The court awarded her $47,000 in child support from his remaining liquid assets, most of which came from the sale of the Greenwich house and the liquidation of his unvested stock options. She was rebuilding Nextflow's public narrative with the help of a communications firm that specialized in correcting the record. Press releases went out to TechCrunch, Forbes, and Wired, with Elena's name properly attributed. A new CTO had been hired, a woman named Dr. Sarah Okafor, who'd built logistics systems for Amazon and didn't need anyone to take credit for her work. The company was stable, growing. Elena consulted on major technical decisions but stayed out of the spotlight, the way she'd always preferred. On the wall above her father's desk hung the first check he'd ever written her, framed in simple black wood. The amount, $1. The memo line, "For the girl who builds what others take credit for," paid in full. Below it, in a shadow box, his final letter to her, the one she'd read in that Fremont apartment 6 weeks ago when she'd decided to stop losing. Elena stood and looked at her father's photograph on the desk, the one from his workshop, oil-stained and smiling. She whispered, I stopped losing, Papa. Just like you said. Outside the study window, Lily sat cross-legged in the garden where the prototype had been born. A laptop balanced on her knees, her small fingers moving across the keyboard with the focused intensity of someone learning a new language. Elena was teaching her to code, not because she needed to, but because she wanted to. Because building things mattered. Because knowing how systems worked meant no one could tell you they didn't. Maya played nearby in the grass, 6 weeks old now, watching the clouds move across the sky with the serious attention babies give to everything they don't yet understand. The world mistakes silence for weakness and volume for strength. But real power doesn't need to announce itself. It waits. It documents. It strikes once. The cruelest thing you can do to someone who underestimated you is let them keep talking until the truth arrives. And when it does, you don't gloat. You don't explain. You just walk away and build something better than what they tried to take. Marcus never knew his wife was a billionaire. He divorced her for her wealthy best friend, believing he was trading up, positioning himself for the next level. Until the $2.3 billion company documents were revealed in a boardroom full of witnesses, and he learned he'd been working for her the entire time. By then, he knew everything. Too late. If this story stirred something in you, if you've ever been underestimated by someone who should have known better, or if you've ever had to choose between staying quiet and standing up, drop a comment below and let me know where you're listening from. Your story matters just as much as Elena's. Elena closed her father's letter carefully and returned it to the shadow box. She turned off the study light. Through the window, golden afternoon sun painted the garden where her daughters played, where the future was being built one line of code and one peaceful afternoon at a time. She walked toward their laughter, leaving the past exactly where it belonged, behind her, finished and finally quiet.